Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at the full moon in Aries, which is occurring on October 9th for most people. And I live in the Central Standard Time zone of the Midwest in the United States, and it's going to occur at 3:55 p.m. So even if you're in Europe, it will be on the 9th. I'm sure for the people in the Southern Hemisphere, it will be on the 10th. And, this is a situation where we're dealing with the sign of Aries, which is ruled by Mars, the god of war. And we're already seeing those kinds of situations having arisen when Jupiter went into Aries. I don't know the timeline of all of that, but we did see some war and talk of war in certain parts of the world. And at the same time, there is a positive side of Aries. It's not all about war. It can be about being brave in the face of adversity. It can be about being very direct, authentic, not being a lemming that has to follow the crowd, but being a pioneer, being a leader, even if you're a leader of one. And whenever there's a full moon, it means that the sun is forming an opposition with it. So the sun, of course, we know is in Libra. And so the opposition shows the two extremes, if you will. The peace-loving Libra and the acquiescent Libra, going along to get along quality, and the rebellious quality of Aries. So I'm trying to think, what date of the week is this? I think it's on a Sunday. Yeah, it's on a Sunday. So the reason I think about these things is is it going to be at night? It doesn't matter if it's exact at night. If it's on a weekend, it could indicate that there could be a lot of opportunities for mischief making and things like that. But at least it's on a Sunday, and for some of you on a Monday, so maybe that will mitigate some of it. But we see that rebellion brewing. And at the time of this full moon, Jupiter, even though it's retrograding, is still in Aries. Now, Jupiter is not forming a conjunction with the moon because it is only at 1 degree of Aries at that time. But even if you just look at, and it's not a personal planet either, but it is the biggest planet, and so it can still exert influence. And it is forming a conjunction with Neptune at this time. Even though Neptune is in a different sign, they're close enough in degrees to form a conjunction. And Jupiter is the ancient ruler of Pisces. So they do have a connection by way of Pisces. And what I feel this means, since these are, Neptune is an outer planet and Jupiter is not a personal planet, is that it's speaking about the collective and what we can expect at this time. So we have these divine blessings, but at the same time, we do have a lot of people that are angry. And that's one of the things that Mars represents, is how we express our anger. There is a square here between Mars is actually in Gemini, and Gemini is getting ready to retrograde at the end of the month of October. And of course, this is only in the second week of October, so it still has time before it retrogrades. And it's squaring off to Neptune in Pisces. And so what this can indicate is that there is, I'm going to just say it, fake news that is going around, that the Gemini is all about collecting, with Mars and Gemini, we're trying to collect information. But the problem is that because it's squaring off to Neptune, there's deception involved. And because we're experiencing this full moon, which is kind of the harvest time, the time of things coming to a head, there are things, this could be disclosure, this could be some kind of, information that's filtering out that makes people angry, but they still don't know who's doing what. And this is part of the problem, is that here we live in this so-called information age where we have the internet, we all have these things, but there's all kinds of barriers to real information. It might be, kinds of leaving things out. It could be one-sided. There's so many reasons that it's hard to get a real handle on exactly what's happening. And with that square, when you have a square, you have a sense of friction and frustration, and people may feel like they want to act on information that isn't necessarily all that it's cracked up to be. And that's why there even people who are psychics and things like that have said, be very wary of the things that you hear. Don't just react in a very rash way, because there might be information that is put out that is false or that is distorted, that is designed to get people to react, like it's trying to manipulate people. I'm recording this in the park, and I had to get up abruptly, so that's why there was like a little gap there. But yeah, and this has been an ongoing thing because, of course, we've had Neptune in Pisces for like a decade. So it's one of those things where Neptune is, when it squares off to those mutable signs, it creates that sense of friction of like, it doesn't have to be Mars, it can be other planets as well. What is reality and what is fiction? What is deception or fantasy? Because another thing that is a form of deception is fantasy. And you have news stories designed to appeal, or they'll do leaks to people's fantasies about a certain situation that they really want to come true, but it's really just meant to string people along, to keep them on their side. So when you're a sovereign being, or you're trying to be one, you're not looking to the outer world to tell you what's true for you. You can, of course, you're going to, you have to find sources of information somewhere if that's appealing to you, but it becomes less necessary altogether. And when you do find it, you might be aligned to something that's closer to the truth. And but the thing that's a little bit problematic with this is that the square to Neptune can make people feel like they have to do something, and they could be like playing into the hands of those who don't give a damn about them and who are just using them to help create the mayhem that they want to create. So just be aware of that. Even if you're like somebody who is retired and you're not an activist and you're just sitting in an easy chair or gardening, there's still the tendency to be like, okay, enough is enough, and I'm going to fight this, and then realize that you didn't know exactly what you were working with to begin with. And of course, there are times when it is very appropriate to show that you are not willing to take it. I'm not saying that we should be passive either, but I'm just looking at it from this perspective. So other things that are happening too, we have basically what we have is that this dichotomy is between peace and war. And it's not always just like actual war in terms of a battlefield that people can, risk their lives to fight upon. It's also other types of a battle for the minds of people, for what they're going to believe is true about life itself. And this is one of the things that has already been the case. And sometimes we do have to have this sense of outrage, this sense of rebellion. But with Libra, there's a tendency, there's like a dark side to both of these energies. The violence of the warrior that can occur, and the I wouldn't say complacency, but that tendency to want to be approved of by the Libra energy that are both destructive. These kinds of things are the dark side of things, but on the positive side, we can have the peacemaker and the person who is courageous. So why do we have to embrace the lower nature, the lower vibration? We don't have to. We can look at it from that perspective. Sometimes people emphasize too much of the negative, and that's what creates that imbalance, because, Libra is a sign of balance. So that's one of the features or themes of this opposition. Mercury is in the late degree of Virgo. So Mercury has come online finally after being retrograde. I'm recording this the day after Mercury went direct, and I'm like so happy. But the thing is that it does take time for Mercury to get out of its shadow. And Mercury rules Virgo, so that strengthens that communication angle of this full moon, because, of course, like I said, we also have Mars in Gemini, and with Mars in Gemini, there's a real aggressive vibe to obtaining and communicating information. Or the information is going to create anger. And it's all about, you see, the whole point of this is about the tipping point, because a lot of people talk in terms of a tipping point. We're at this precipice, but you keep hearing every month from astrologers, from psychics, oh, this is the time, it's going to happen. And I think a lot of people in this field are kind of maybe tempering that a little bit. No, some of them are still doing it. I don't think they're trying to be clickbaitish. I think they really do feel that could happen any day. But the point is that we have free will, so we can't just say that something's going to happen on X date. A lot of times, astrologers or psychics have tried to narrow it down, and they've had to, I don't know about eat their words, but you know what I mean. It didn't happen. And I think in retrospect, when we look back at this time in history, we're going to see a lot more of the storm clouds forming than we do now. We're in the thick of things. So it's very hard when you're in the middle of things to be able to see what is actually happening. But this idea of the quickening, and I have heard this from energy readers, that it's going to be like things are starting to pick up steam. Is that going to happen? Well, I do believe that that's happening just based on the United States, which could have an impact in other countries around the world, because we're going to have an eclipse, a lunar eclipse on the date of our elections for our midterms. And the midterms are a very important election for the United States, the future of the United States. So, and that in and of itself, whatever takes place during that time, could create a lot of, ripple effects. So it's one of those things where I think that we're going to start in October to see this, because this is the eclipse season happening. And of course, yeah, we're going to have solar eclipse in Scorpio. And what is, in the tarot, which card is connected to Scorpio in the major arcana? The death card. What is the death? The death is of the old way of being, the old systems crumbling. We see that with Pluto in Capricorn in its last gasp, one of the last degrees. As a matter of fact, there will be squares between the Sun and Moon to Pluto, because they're squaring off as cardinal signs. Now, that is, Pluto is this control that people are really pushing back on. I just saw this video coming out of China, where the people were furious at this control, and they, what was happening in I don't know the name of the city or province or whatever, but they were pushing back, and the government eased their restrictions the next day. So people are rising up. There's no question about it. They might not put it on the evening news because they don't want people to think that others are actually fighting back. They want people to think that everybody's going along with the program, but they are fighting back. And they will continue, and this may actually exacerbate that. But the key is always to approach these things with that sense of balance that Libra is known for, not to go off the deep end. Because, full moons can heighten emotions. And if anybody has the moon in Aries or knows somebody that has the moon in Aries, you know that it's a volcano, that person has a tendency to be very, quick to anger. And that kind of thing is like a powder keg. When you're talking about a full moon in Aries, people think that the water signs are the emotional ones. And that's absolutely true, but the fire signs are emotional too. They just express it a bit differently. And especially when it comes to a cause, when it comes to an idea, the fire signs can really get hot under the collar if there's a sense of their freedom being limited or injustices taking place. So let me see if there are other things. There are some positive things going on. The Sun is in conjunction with Venus in the sign that Venus is in the sign that it rules, so that's nice. That can make people want to be more loving, genteel, and things like that. And that might counter some of that aggression that is coming through from this moon. A trine between the Sun and Mars, as well as Venus and Mars trining one another. That's cooperative. That's very cooperative for anything that you're trying to bring about. I think it's, even like on a professional level, that can be great for that, where you're doing constructive things to enhance your success and what you're trying to promote on a personal level, but also in terms of the collective, like doing constructive things. Mercury's squaring Mars, so speaking, off the top of your head is not a good idea, because you may feel, and of course they're both in the signs that are ruled by Mercury, so there might be a lot of that going on because they're so talkative. And the thing is, it's like saying the wrong thing at the wrong time because you're being careless in speech. Remember that saying, loose lips sink ships. And a trine between the Sun and Saturn and Mars and Saturn. So that can be disciplined action, disciplined attitudes for promoting yourself. This is actually a very good for professional things, I feel, in spite of everything else that we're talking about with the world events. I'm not much of a mundane astrologer. I'm just kind of like looking at it from that perspective when I'm doing these full moons. But personally, this may be very good for you to promote yourself, especially since Mercury has gone direct and before Mars goes retrograde. Yeah, and I just want to say a final thing about those squares between the Sun and the Moon and Pluto, is that sometimes we have this feeling that somebody is trying to keep us from shining our light. And this, if you have this in your natal chart, you'll totally get what I'm talking about. Because there are people that don't feel powerful in their own right, and so they try to dominate others. The late Wayne Dyer called them petty tyrants. But the problem is that sometimes people cooperate with these individuals. They allow themselves, they kind of like give their power away, thinking that they are, that's no use, that this person has control over them. And too much of the population is actually still in that mode. Even if they had parents that were relatively, cool, they can still have this tendency to just kind of kneel at the presence of authority figures. I saw a video, and there was a young woman talking about this, and she called it like outsourcing your thoughts to someone else. Like instead of thinking for yourself, you're allowing somebody else to think for you. And that's that authoritarian connection. Pluto is also about the shadow. And so when we have people trying to impose their will on us, it brings out certain things. For some people who feel powerless, sometimes they just kind of go into victim mode, but sometimes they go into rebellious mode, which is self-destructive as well, because they're not acting, they're reacting. And so this is one of the things that we have to really keep in mind, is that if somebody's trying to push your buttons, you have the power to identify this and refuse to go along with the program. It doesn't mean that you're going to just pretend it doesn't exist. You might have to say something to that person. You might have to affirm to that person that you're not going along with it. Whatever it means, but the point is that the idea that you have choice, that you don't have to just almost like you're a robot that is programmed, and then they push a button and you act in a predictable fashion. either being rebellious and therefore self-destructive, or being passive and just allowing yourself to be dominated. That there's actually a third option, which means that you're going to choose to act in accordance to your own connection to a higher self that gives you that wisdom to know what is an aligned action. So anyway, I just wanted to give a few thoughts on that, and we will see what happens. I'm recording this, how many days? Today's the 3rd, so it's happening in 6 days. So I hope all of you have a very blessed I was going to say new moon, full moon, and take care. Bye.